Well, good morning, colleagues, and welcome to what I hope will be a good use of your time. It won't be as good as the starting joke. I have to tell you that here and now. I have to confess. Um, Anne referred to having access to a smartphone. There's a couple of things I want to show you that you can quickly look up on your phone and engage with, but it will just demonstrate the simplicity of the app and the simplicity of its use. It's quite a heavy session in terms of PowerPoint information, but that is deliberate so that you are able to take these slides and use them with your colleagues or use them to go back and look up things that are of interest. Because although the pace assumes relatively little technical knowledge, there might be some things that are new to you. And on that general theme, this is the purpose and aims, is to talk about useful things from research, things that will support engagement. The engagement is primarily youth work, adult education, but we will talk about community development as well, and some tools for evaluating both sessions and the longer term evaluation of the impact of work. So our hope is that you will be a bit more skillful and a bit more confident in all of these. I think in terms of context, it's worth saying that the last year, what happened in most instances is people got thrown in at the deep end and learned a number of things, learned how to use Teams or a few other apps. And once the member of staff could use them and once their clients used them, they stuck with them because they worked and they were reasonably fit for purpose. So it may be some of you will know these apps and these ideas inside out. But the chances are you won't know the range of apps and the simple apps that might be useful now, because all of them have changed radically. Anybody who's had a Teams account or a Zoom account for over a year will see the number of things that have changed just on those apps. So what we're trying to give is a quick overview of the most accessible and useful things that might help you plan, deliver, evaluate your work as it's going along. All of them are things I've seen used in practice, but the big initial health warning is you have to clear it with your local authority, you have to clear it with your sponsoring body if you want to use some of these technologies. And it's quite important that you make sure that you do that so that you know the parameters you're working within, because some local authorities or sponsoring bodies have a different view of what's appropriate and what's not, what they're comfortable with and what's not. And nationally, you'll probably be aware that the response to Zoom's a good example of that. So in some areas, banned entirely. In some areas, you can join Zoom but can't host Zoom. In some areas, you can host Zoom and it's the common use. And that's true of a lot of these apps, bits of software and bits of technology that can help you. So although all of these I would recommend as broadly having seen in use in public sector bodies, you have the general concern behind it of making sure that you're not breaching any protocols that might compromise safeguarding or might cause you any technical issues, because some of it is about clashes on your machines. So as a starting point, and this will help us emphasize the most useful parts of the session and help us evaluate the impact of the session, what I'm going to ask you to do in the chat, and don't do it yet, but if you have a think about it, is to rate how confident you are about those areas of work: A, B, C, and D: engagement, evaluation of sessions, evaluating longer term, and useful apps. So with the 1 being not confident at all and the 10 being entirely confident. So what your entry in the chat will look like is something like this. A, B, C, and D with the rating number beside it. So if you think for a moment, are you confident or not confident in each of these? If you put them in the chat, and we'll be looking at those, and it will give us a sense of the things that we need to spend a bit more time and focus on, and give us a sense of whether that confidence has increased at the end of the session. So if you take a moment, and as soon as you've got a rating for A, B, C, and D, stick that in the chat. As Anne said in the introduction, we did limit the sessions to 60, which is not quite ideal for discussion, but is a manageable level where we can reflect the feedback that we get and use the feedback that we get. So if you've rated, let's start. Move on. And I want to contextualize the stuff around engagement with about research. Blended learning, remote learning is not new. Open University, for example, big international success, 50 plus years old. Teaching in Australia has relied, on radio signals for a long time, even before the internet. And it's been quite well embedded for some time in other sectors. But there are good lessons to be learned from those sectors. And some of those sectors work with similar client groups to CLD. My first experience of online learning was in 1997. I enrolled in a class that was being taught by Miami-Dade in psychiatry. And you don't get much more distant than Larkgall and Lanarkshire versus the sunny climes in Miami. But even then, at that time, they were building their portfolio on research. So we have picked up a lot, not simply about being thrown in at the deep end for remote engagement, but a lot of the techniques that are going to be useful. I think some of the other things that are useful for the CLD sector in particular are things that encourage appropriate engagement. So we've actually learned a lot from new things like esports and gaming online about how you keep people engaged, how you keep them active, how you keep that level of motivation up. And I want to reflect on some of the bigger lessons that are going to be useful in practice. Broadly speaking, the pedagogy, andragogy, structure your work, tell people the outcomes or outputs or impacts, give them useful feedback. Those broad elements of engagement are the same. But learning design, designing how your experience goes forward, can make a difference. So there's a kind of another layer to this experience that is good to think about, that is good to plan and evaluate. One of the things that's true in every culture, every country, or every sector is young, disadvantaged, or less motivated learners in all instances engage less readily and are more likely to drop out. So you do have to have a stronger and different approach if those are the people that you're working with, and of course, bread and butter for CLD. But in that example, when I worked with Miami and then went on to become part of their steering group, they made a strategic decision as an institution that they would not use remote or distance learning techniques with anyone whose first post-school experience was, in their first year, So the first year always had to be on a campus, and the subsequent years could be distance, remote, blended. So we do know that there's higher risk there, and we need to do different things for less engaged people, people that have circumstances that don't allow them to commit as strong. Now, that's probably pretty obvious, but I think what we do is the key that's come from research, and what we do is improve the level of interaction and engagement. The simple stuff stands out. Sessions should generally be shorter and broken up into different activities. You should never have, even at its best, you should never have more than 15 minutes of inactivity. If you're doing an input on something, it should never be more than 15 minutes. A taught session should generally, or an engagement session, generally be no more than 50 minutes. Now, that's a rule of thumb. It depends on the group and it depends on exactly what you're doing. But what research tells us is break it up. If you've got 3 hours of activity, it should be 3 different sessions. There should be stuff in between. There should be activities for them to do in between. And if you've got 3 hours available online, don't use 3 hours available online. Do an hour, give them an hour off to do stuff and bring them back for an hour. So research tells us, shorter, broken up, and active, a lot of active. There should also be a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous, so live and go away and do stuff. And the asynchronous activity could be the flipped classroom idea of read this in advance and then come together to discuss, or do this task and come together and see how we got on. Or it can be, after an input, go away and evaluate, analyze, see how it works for you. That's the kind of thing. So a good experience, and this is the learning design model, a good experience of using the amount of learning time available to them is to strike a balance of synchronous and asynchronous. Generally speaking, synchronous, what you're doing live with them, should be about motivating. It's rarely about teaching or input. It's about doing stuff that will engage them, encourage them to think, reflect, and be active. So the idea of recording lectures that you would get in some institutions is not an ideal model, but it can work with higher level, mature, well-experienced learners. But if you want to engage people, if you want them to reflect, you really want to strike that balance and use the synchronous time for motivating. Simpler explanations, clear personal feedback, and that's an important thing. In group work, you probably don't realise how often you're giving very individual feedback through a nod or a smile or a quick comment. And I think online, aiming for simpler explanations and giving more personal feedback needs to be structured because it's very simple to give a general feedback. But you do have to aim for giving individual feedback and good regular questioning to support learning so that you know about the pace and you have a confidence that they're picking things up that are going to be useful to them. The other thing is about creating a social experience. Online is still a social experience, especially for the young people that we deal with. They're quite used to that as a social experience. They view most of their social life as being digitally based. So it's not simply about information and material. It's about that whole engagement. And the social experience will often mean, and research tells us, that the more types of engagement, if you text them, if you phone them, if you speak to them online, if you send them material, the more types of engagement, the more social that experience is likely to be. And as I mentioned earlier, active engagement for them to do things is going to be how it works. So just to focus from those research lessons to techniques for engagement, what you should be doing is to plan activities and not just input, and share the plan. And the activities might be, we'll read this, we'll watch this video, we'll discuss it, somebody will lead on their analysis of what went on or what happened or why it went wrong or what was illegal. And you've got to lay out the plan for the whole activity, not just the discussion, not just the input. You also want to support as much co-creation as practical. That's part of the course for CLD work. But again, encouraging them to suggest platforms you might use, videos you might use, resources you might use, pictures you might use, even field trip ideas. Surprisingly, field trips are much easier online than you would think if you've got Google Earth. If you've got Google Earth, you can physically go to places. Well, you can go to places virtually on screen, but you can look at fairly real-life pictures of things and circumstances and places. You should also model assignments. And what I mean by that is if you've got questions, answers, stuff you want them to do, show them what a report looks like, show them what a poster looks like, show them what an assignment looks like, by giving them an example that you've created. And in its simplest, if you flip back to the discussion we had a few minutes ago when I showed you what your chat should look like, that was a touch patronizing. But the purpose was really to demonstrate this point, that if you show people, it gives them a confidence about exactly what they're typing in. So people are less likely to type in the whole question and then a rating. Because people feel nervous or will feel silly if they do that, and the answers that come up look different from everybody else's. So showing them what an assignment or a task or an answer looks like is a good help, because that builds confidence in the engagement. You should also use as many questions as practical in your interactions, and even the simple ones, and I'll highlight a few more examples. And building in feedback, and when I say feedback, that goes two ways. It's the feedback you give to them about their contribution and the feedback they give to you about the understanding. And I'll demonstrate the practicalities of these things that you can do as the session goes on. But those are the general techniques. The other thing is the simple practicalities of being aware of their physical, social or family circumstances. So clients, users might not be able to talk easily, so it could be text you use, it could be WhatsApp, there could be phone calls at different times. You will be aware when you work with groups of the circumstances that individuals are in quite often, but you always want to assume there's a risk that that will change, or that people can't talk freely at times or can't use your cameras freely at times. And the preparation for that, understanding what operating context they're in, will help you plan what your activities can be, because there are some things that they can't engage in if they're in a shared room or using a shared machine that's unavailable, 2/3 of the day. So you do want to diplomatically find out what the restrictions are on them when you plan the activity, and being aware that that can change is quite an important element. So giving people an option to text you on the phone is quite often a helpful thing to do. Camera use to make it more social is a good thing, but you'll find a lot of reticence around that, and it's a big issue in a lot of colleges, universities and other places that the cameras are rarely on, and you never know how engaged people are unless you have other techniques. But to make it a social experience, encourage camera use, but only if it's practical and only if it doesn't set other people apart who are unable to. The chat function is a great function. If you're using Teams, Zoom, Google Meet, any of the other platforms, that's the way to build an interaction in a big way, using closed questions, yes, no, agree, disagree. Even if their knowledge is not important, their engagement is at that stage. So using the chat function to get that engagement is part of the whole story. The other thing is to explore well-being and general development. Some of the things that we do in CLD are not aiming for qualifications or a level of sophistication. I don't mean to simplify it, but in some instances, encouraging a parent to cope better, encouraging somebody's well-being, mental health response, encouraging them to learn some new skills. It's not a qualification type of measure. And you have to, when you plan an experience and you're going to evaluate it long term, be fairly clear what the benefits are of that experience. And it might be, particularly in the current circumstances, maintaining or improving well-being, encouraging and supporting general development around knowledge, skills, confidence. And those have to be built into your engagement. You have to be asking them how they are. And I'll give you a few more examples of the types of things. But you do want the experience to allow them to reflect on a confidential basis quite often how they're feeling, whether this is giving them more confidence, whether this is helpful to them. Because what you're measuring is not always a sophisticated level of academic impact. It's about personal development, it's about personal growth, and sometimes it's about maintenance of personal well-being. And if you're using things like word clouds, if you've seen word clouds before, you ask people to type in a word, and the more times that word occurs, the bigger it is in the word cloud. It's quite a good way if you're doing sessions to ask them how they're feeling about the session in advance, see what the word cloud says, ask them the next time, do a little comparison. But that gives them a fairly anonymous way of expressing their view, and gives you a sense of whether you're giving them confidence, whether they're feeling good about the session. And that is part of keeping engagement constructive and effective. So the key points I wanted to pull together then around research and engagement is planning the engagement's different. It's the whole experience rather than the session by session type of activity. Shorter sessions and active engagement. and build feedback and evaluation techniques into your planning. So when you plan things all the way along, how you're going to get feedback, how you're going to judge whether it's successful. And I'm going to demonstrate that now by asking you in the chat box, rate from 1 to 10 how useful this initial part of the input has been as an introduction. So you don't need to type in any narrative, you're only typing in a number. So number 1 is, hey, I knew all this already. And number 10 is, yeah, some of that's quite good. There's some things I can use. So if you take a moment to go into the chat function now, and if you type in 1 being, I knew it already, and 10 being, that's got stuff that's quite useful to me. The other thing I should say is that there is substantive research behind the stuff I'm saying. I haven't chosen to fill it full of academic references, but if you needed more information about that, we'd certainly be happy to share it. So assuming everybody's okay with having typed in a rating, we'll move on. And I want to talk about the specific evaluation of sessions or events and start, of course, with the health warning. Whatever bits of technology you're going to use, try and make sure it's okay with your local authority, it's okay with your sponsoring body. Evaluation and feedbacks, 2 ways. To clients, from clients. You want some mechanism that evaluates satisfaction and learning of progress and well-being. Satisfaction is because you're predicting motivation by judging satisfaction. So if people are enjoying the session, you can be fairly confident that you'll keep them and that they'll benefit from it. So your evaluation usually covers those 3 areas. Online questions and assessment are ideal actually for checking learning and progress. Probably better than interpersonal stuff if you've got a large group. And the satisfaction element will give you an insight to how motivated and engaged people are longer term. One small example, if you want to encourage young people in particular to use their cameras, if you're doing youth work, or if you want to do active things, is there's an equivalent of doing the red, green, amber thing in a workshop environment or in a group environment, is to say to them at the start of the session, right, run around the house, I want to find a green thing, an orange thing and a red thing. And when I talk to you for 10 minutes about healthy eating, I'm going to ask you, green if you understand it, amber if you're not sure, red if you don't understand it at all. And you could ask them, find something, and the stranger the item you find, the more novel the item you find, give a prize. That kind of thing does a few things. It gets them physically moving, but it gets them looking around the house, and it gets them active. It gets them thinking about feedback. So there's a lot of simple ideas that will help give you feedback, and that's a simple one. And there's lots of variations of that, but the idea of finding a green, amber and red item is a fairly straightforward one. Using the chat function, true or false. One of the things that young people in particular like is a bit of a competition. So giving some kind of prize or recognition for the fastest answer. So you ask a question on a slide. So you do a bit of input, and then you say to them, right, I'm going to ask a question. The first to get this right, we all applaud or we give them a prize. It's some form of recognition. And here's an example to follow. Answers in the chat now. Type in an A or a B. And I don't have the chat function up, but I'm hoping Anne has spotted who's got this answer first. And for the recording, what we should be saying is that we shouldn't be identifying individuals. But you see the approach is stick a question up, get them to type in an A or a B, and it shows that level of engagement. It shows that they're on it, and it gives them a level of entertainment, confidence, motivation, using the technology. Using emojis is quite common, particularly for young people, and there are ways to do it on PCs. You can cut and paste emojis. In Teams and other things, they call them reactions, but it's the same thing. And I think if you're working with a younger group, to use emojis on your platform is really useful. Just check what the emojis are and just clarify exactly what you want them to use them for and what they should look like. Post-it style feedback. So most platforms have a whiteboard. Google have a whiteboard. There's lots of variations of a whiteboard where people can, in effect, write on a board that is shared, write on a board that you can look at individually, or you can look at all the students. The most common one, the Jamboard, is the most common one, but whiteboards are float about in pretty well every platform that's available, and you would want to get familiar with how to use it. Whiteboards are quite good because people can do it individually. They're not cluttered or complicated, and you can do a lot of simple examples. And one version that I particularly like, because it doesn't matter if you're talking to them on Teams, on Zoom, on any other platform. You may want to just go off that platform and use another mechanism for your feedback, use another whiteboard, or it may be something that doesn't have a whiteboard built in. And whiteboard.fi, which is short for Finland, does allow anonymity, and it's easy to use in a range of devices. And this can be used for post-it style feedback for a session. You can actually use that live. This is what the page looks like when you sign on to Whiteboard, whether you're a learner or whether you're a facilitator. And although it looks like you have to register, you don't. If you were to use Whiteboard, you would simply click on New Class, and you can set up a classroom that should be live for a couple of hours. And what you do with the people that you're working with is you say, click on whiteboard.fi and click Join Class, and you have a code that you give them. So I've done one already that I set up this morning. So if you've got a smartphone, if you Google whiteboard.fi, and that page will come up, and if you hit Join Class and type in the code A95H2. So I'll leave that up for a moment to see if you can get signed up to the class. So if you haven't got a phone handy, you can simply do it on a different page on your laptop. This will work on Apple devices, it will work on laptops, PCs, it will work on Samsung smartphones, Apple smartphones. So I'm just going to do a quick example using whiteboard.fi of what that will look like. So I'm hoping that has given you enough time to find whiteboard.fi, hit Join Class. It will ask you to put in your name, and I should have said you don't have to put in your name. You can put in your initials, you can put in a number, you can put in an animal. If you wanted to be secure in this and get feedback, because you're the only one that has that code, but you wanted it to be anonymous, simply say to the participants, pick your favorite TV star, your favorite music, your favorite artist, your favorite song, your pet's name, something that they can identify their feedback, but does allow you to get feedback from them. So if you bear with me, what I'm going to try and do at this stage is to share my whiteboard. Right. And whoever has put Buchan in, can you write something on your whiteboard? Yeah, you're doing it on the phone, I'm guessing. But you should be able to write an okay or a yes, no. In fact, Yep, that's worked. So, although we've only got one that's come up at the moment, and I'm not sure why, it may be that I set it up too early in the morning, but I could toggle onto my whiteboard, toggle back to student whiteboards, but that should allow me to see the kind that people are writing in or the people that are typing in. So that's a simple way of getting, I'm going to describe it as post-it style feedback, that they can yes, no, or put numbers or that kind of thing in. And it's free, it's accessible. When you set a room up, it will stay live for up to 2 hours, then it wipes everything. And if you wanted to use it a couple of times during the session, there's a few options. You can have a lobby, you can lock the room, you can hide student names, you can wipe, you can save the whiteboards, you can clear all whiteboards, you can invite another teacher. So that's a fairly simple and free and fairly reliable way of collecting that kind of feedback. There's a beauty in how that works, because you can do it entirely anonymously, and you can, with a lot of confidence, get that feedback and know that there's no GDPR issues, there's no issues around security, there's no issues around anonymity. And sorry, colleagues, I'm just going to go back to sharing. Yeah, I'm going to go back to sharing. Unfortunately, I had a slight hitch there. Right. Sorry, colleagues. So I just want to confirm we should be back to the PowerPoint. But you see, Whiteboard.fi, fairly simple and straightforward to use with any age group, and it doesn't really take any training. Evaluation and check and understanding generally, there's a range of different platforms that you can use for your discussion. So one good example would be Socrative. Socrative's another. There's a lot of these that you can sign up for a free version, and the free version, where it might limit the number, usually the numbers are high enough that don't cause any real problem. Socrative, the numbers are particularly good. And Socrative, like the others, can allow you a level of anonymity. So you can, in your presentation, go on to Socrative, and you'll see that the screen that you see when you sign up for it allows you to do multiple choice, true or false, short answer questions. So you can build in short answer questions to your engagement with the people that you're working with. And you'll see on Socrative, there's lots of ways to use it. You can require names or not. You can shuffle the questions and shuffle the answers. You can have question feedback. So if you give multiple choice with 4 questions, you can explain why 3 answers are wrong and 1 is right. So this is the kind of thing you can do live with them, or you can set them as a task to go away and do. And you can show the final score. You can do it teacher pace, so you could do the questions one after another. And quite often, even just as a taught experience, Kahoot and others like Socrative suggest that you actually teach using questions, that your whole session is about questions and discussion and coming to a conclusion. And once you've done that on Socrative, like many of the others, like Kahoot and a few others that I'll mention, you can then reflect on and analyze the answers. So if you're doing an ESOL class or whatever, you know, if you've got 5 questions, that if everybody gets question 3 wrong, whatever you taught that was around question 3, the teaching needs to be better, because if everybody got it wrong, the teaching element's poorer. But if everybody gets it right, you can have a reasonable confidence that the pace, the teaching content was good. And if you've got that mixed picture, then it's about slowing down the pace or understanding what went wrong. But it does allow you, when you have feedback that you can share with the students or keep to yourself, that allows you to be a bit more pointed and experienced in improving your teaching. So Socrative, again, there's a bot version, but the free version does all the things you would want. And I don't know what the number limit on. I would need to look because they've changed it, but it certainly is way over 20. There's another one that does very similar stuff called Poll Everywhere. Poll Everywhere, you will see you can do multiple choice, word cloud, question and answer, click on images, surveys. This has got better graphics and it's quite good for younger learners. So you can put on a lot of graphics that it's got built into it. But again, it's the same idea. You can have competitions, you can have activities, and you can either teach using it or assess and use it for feedback. Poll Everywhere, it also has a lot of stuff already built in, a lot of ones that you can take and vary, although I would think it's unlikely that they're highly usable, but some are quite good that you could use the graphics, you could use a structure around them. So there's a raft of bits of apps or software that you can use that don't require downloads onto the students, onto the learners, onto the clients' machines. Because what you're doing in effect, like you are with Whiteboard, is you're going onto a website to use the app, and then when you come off, it doesn't stay on your machine. And again, in terms of safety, safeguarding, in terms of accessibility, that idea of using apps or software that are in effect making people go onto a website to do input and then come off is a sensible way to do it, because they're data requirements are not heavily embedded. The space on their phone or their iPad is not used up. So Socrative, Mentimeter, Kahoot, Poll Everywhere are really good examples that all have good free versions. Miro and Mural are similar, but have twists around them, work in slightly different ways. Mural's a more sophisticated one. It's a harder image. You would use it that probably more in community development and engagement. But all of them are good. And to be honest, if you Google each of them, it will tell you a little more about it. But there's also a very good site that I'll refer you to later that gives you a one-paragraph explanation of these and how they can be used in a CLD context. But these are the ones that I would say are probably the most useful and probably the most popular, and are free and allow a level of anonymity. If we can talk about community development, because we've really talked about youth work and adult education type of approaches so far, there's a range of other technologies. One that's grown in popularity, and many of you will be using it already, is Console. And again, if you were to Google that, you would get a bit more of the story around Console. It's been established in other countries. I think it started in Italy. But it's a very good method. It's a very good bit of software for encouraging community responses to community ideas. There's a very good, Voice Scotland have very good resources available, and involved.org, if you go on there, there's some very good material there. Those are three sources that I would say if you had a look at these, you'll get a good raft of resources that are going to be useful to support people working in community development. Console, the front page looks like this. It's a very bright, it's a very attractive model. And the Voice, the National Standards for Community Engagement, which you've probably seen before, has a lot of very useful information on it. And again, it's fairly easy to use. Involved.org, the third on the list, is a particularly good example because it carries a whole raft of things that really support digital tools and where to start. So if you're looking for new or better digital tools, or don't have tools that do all the things that you want them to, this gives you the story. And when you scroll down, Digital Tools Database, you'll see the start of it there. Name on the left, what it's used for, synchronous, asynchronous, web address, and a description. And they are quite simply in alphabetical order the main apps that you're going to want to look at, And because they're on here, you know that they've been used in that context before, so are likely to be safe, are likely to be approved by your authority or sponsoring body, and are likely to be practical. So I would recommend going on to the involve.org website if you're looking for better platforms or better resources that might help you engage in an encouraging way, in a useful way for CLD here in Scotland. There's a few related considerations, and I'll move on quickly to this. Take guidance. Don't be tempted to use things like Facebook rooms if you can avoid it. There's a lot of social media that carries risks around anonymity, safeguarding, bullying. So I would caution against using too many of the common platforms without checking about compliance, about safety, about GDPR and the other things that are behind it, because in your professional environment, there are enough tools that are compliant there without having to use the ones that, to be fair, most clients are familiar with and are using commonly. You need to be careful about camera and what your decisions are about camera on, camera off. And remember the point I made at the start about it being a social experience. Now, I'm looking for a bit of feedback in the chat at the moment. So I'm looking for a 1 to 4 rating. That's stuff around evaluation of sessions. Can you type in 1, I knew this feedback already, and 4, this is nearly all new to me, and we could do with a little more detail, and that will help us in the understanding of the usefulness, and it will help us in the design of other sessions. So if you go to the chat now and talking only about that engagement element and evaluation element, can you rate it 1, which was you were already familiar, and 4, this is nearly all new to me, with the 2 and 3 scores in between. We want to move on now to the more substantive issue around evaluation, the long-term, the manager or long-term perspective. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Anne to pick it up from here.
Thanks, John. I'm going to be looking at the substantive evaluation, as John said, and it wouldn't be CLD without mentioning our quality improvement framework, which is how good is our community learning development. The 4th edition is in a draft form at the moment, and we are using these quality indicators. It's been reviewed substantially to ensure that it is fit for purpose. So there's some considerations here about being clear about your intentions, and planned impact is central to planning and evaluation. So that needs to be considered at the onset. If you don't know and anticipate intended outcomes, then it's going to make it difficult to measure the impact of that. John's already touched on, safeguarding considerations and about inclusion and access needs to be considered in a different context. And we're very much in a different context at the moment. So another consideration. On the positive side, there are many ways to get feedback as you go along and evaluate wider experiences. And that John has introduced you to a number of platforms, some in more detail than others, but I would encourage you to have a closer look at these. For the purpose of the last part of this session, I'm going to look at how good is our community learning development and that quality improvement framework, and how that can support the process around longer term evaluation and considerations. I'm very much going to focus on the challenge questions, but this slide gives you an outline of what the framework looks like at the moment. It has 16 quality indicators in 3 sections: performance and outcomes, management and delivery, and leadership and direction. You can see the titles at the top. Across a whole range of those quality indicators, you'll see challenge questions that could be very useful in the digital world in terms of measuring the impact, and support you in your process to think about, what's working well and where you still need to improve. So the first quality indicator I'm going to reference is performance and outcomes. So I'm not going to read all of the details here. I've just highlighted a few that are in the document at the moment around challenge questions for you to think about. So asking yourself that question. So in 1.1, that is very much about your performance against aims and targets. It links into what I said earlier. You need to be clear about what you're trying to achieve and some of the methods that you're going to be able to use that's going to demonstrate that. So overall, how well can you demonstrate the collective impact of your work on learners, groups and communities in wider areas? John's shown you useful tools that you can use across youth work, adult work, community development. In terms of, here are another few. This is around 2.2, improving learning outcomes. So the heading here is how well are outcomes for stakeholders being achieved? Another few challenge questions that you might want to use. We've highlighted previously this document can be used, in sections, a few challenge questions, a whole QI, and you can shape it and adapt it in any way that fits your needs. So which challenge questions would best support your continuous improvement? 2.3 is about improving life chances. You can see there how well is our CLD offer enhancing physical, social and emotional wellbeing of participants. Again, John made reference earlier around wellbeing. So important in the current context, so important to learn from some of the suggestions that John made around, approaches to the delivery of blended or remote learning. And the last quality indicator here I'm going to reference is 6.2, and that is about securing improvement. So how effective is the leadership in improving outcomes? How do you know that outcomes for learners and communities are improving as a result of your quality assurance processes? What do you have in place? So that's just a snapshot of a few of the quality indicators that you might want to look at to help support this process. And the last slide, further reflections to support improvement. So we're just about to conclude. Do staff and volunteers know enough about? You can see the list there, just a few: research and helpful evidence. We began by looking at research. We looked at engagement techniques. We looked at different platforms. Learner analytics. Are you using the data? What's it telling you? Are you monitoring wellbeing? Where can you find guidance and advice? We've signposted you to a few places. Next slide, please, John. So in terms to finish, same questions again around an evaluation and a scoring across those 4 areas. So I would ask you to use the chat function now to record your confidence now in the key areas that have been looked at, and we'll give you a minute or so to do that, and then that will conclude the session. We'll open up. We have had no questions in the chat, so we'll open up for hands up and for any questions to come in towards the end. We're nearly there. Thank you. I would just say, in terms of a quick snapshot and analysis of the chat function, across evaluations at the start of the session, it more leaned towards less confident in evaluating longer term work and useful apps that might support work, which is the last 2 there. On the next session, on scoring around some of the platforms we introduced to you, it was higher rating around you weren't familiar with them previously, and that had increased awareness there. And now we're looking at overall quite high scores look like are coming in here. Okay,